In 1296, England invaded Scotland. King Edward I, known as the Hammer of the Scots, wanted absolute control over the country. Scottish castles fell one after another. Many nobles surrendered. To avoid complete destruction, England stripped Scotland of its independence, removed Scottish leaders from power, and placed English forces across the land. To many people, it seemed Scotland's fight was already over, but deep inside the occupied country, anger was growing. Villages suffered under English rule. Scottish families were taxed heavily. Soldiers marched through towns, and resistance was crushed with brutal force. Fear spread across Scotland, yet so did hatred toward the English occupation. Then, one man stepped forward. William Wallace was not a king or a powerful lord. He came from a lesser noble family and was almost completely unknown outside Scotland. But Wallace refused to bow to England. As tensions grew, he began leading small attacks against English soldiers and garrisons. At first, they were quick raids carried out in secret, but every victory inspired more Scots to join him. Before long, the rebellion was spreading across the country. What started as resistance from one man was becoming a national uprising, and England was about to discover that Scotland was far from conquered. In 1297, England sent a massive army north to crush the rebellion once and for all. The English believed the Scots had no chance, but William Wallace had a plan. Near Stirling, a narrow wooden bridge crossed the river. It was small, cramped, and dangerous for a large army. Wallace and his forces waited silently on the hills nearby. The English began crossing first, confident they would overwhelm the Scots with numbers. But Wallace did not attack immediately. He waited and waited until enough English soldiers were trapped across the bridge. Then, the Scots charged. Spears crashed into armored knights. English soldiers were pushed into the river below. Panic spread through the English army. The narrow bridge became a death trap. What was supposed to be an easy victory for England turned into complete chaos. By the end of the battle, the English army had been destroyed, and across Scotland, William Wallace became a legend. In 1298, King Edward returned, this time with an even larger army. Thousands of English soldiers marched into Scotland, archers, knights, and heavily armored cavalry. Edward wanted revenge for the humiliation at Stirling Bridge. William Wallace gathered his forces near Falkirk. The Scots formed tight circles of spearmen, ready to stop the English cavalry charge. At first, the formation held, but then English longbowmen stepped forward. Arrows rained down across the battlefield. The Scottish lines began to break apart. Panic spread through the army. Then the English cavalry charged. The battlefield became chaos. By the end of the battle, the Scots had been crushed. Wallace survived, but his great victory was gone. After Falkirk, he disappeared into the shadows. For years, England hunted him across Scotland, but Wallace refused to surrender. And the legend of William Wallace only continued to grow. For years, England searched across Scotland for William Wallace. Rewards were offered for his capture. English soldiers raided villages, questioned nobles, and hunted anyone suspected of helping him. But Wallace remained free. To the English, he was now more than a rebel. He had become a symbol of resistance. Then, in 1305, everything changed. Wallace was betrayed near Glasgow, captured by Scottish knights loyal to England, bound in chains, and taken south to London. Crowds filled the streets to watch him arrive. The English wanted to make an example out of him. At his trial, Wallace was accused of treason against the English crown, but Wallace refused to accept the charge. He declared that he had never sworn loyalty to England. The sentence was already decided. Wallace was dragged through the streets of London, then brutally executed before a massive crowd. His body was cut apart, and pieces were displayed across Britain as a warning to anyone who dared rebel against England. But the execution did not destroy his legacy. Instead, William Wallace became immortal. Across Scotland, stories of his courage spread for generations, and centuries later, his name still echoes through history.